Most people think they've left their childhood behind. They moved out, grew up, built careers, fell in love, had kids. But beneath the surface, something old is still pulling the strings. Why do we keep choosing the same types of partners? Why do we sabotage the good things? Why do certain situations trigger us so deeply, like a wound that never healed? What if your past isn't in the past at all? What if it's still living inside you, not as memory, but as pattern? This isn't just nostalgia or trauma. This is the unconscious replaying old scripts written before you even had the words to say no. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of ourselves we exile because it feels too painful, too dangerous, or too unacceptable. But what most people never learn is this: the shadow isn't just yours. You carry shadows that were passed down, fears that were never spoken, shame that was never healed, rules that no one remembers making, yet everyone still follows. Your family's unprocessed pain didn't disappear. It became part of your psychological inheritance. You were born into an emotional atmosphere long before you knew how to protect yourself. And so, you adapted. You survived. But in that survival, you lost parts of who you truly are. This is the story of that loss and the path back to wholeness. Over the next hour, you're not going to learn information. You're going to remember things your soul already knows, but your mind was trained to forget. The patterns will become visible, the pain will have a name, and the child inside you will finally be heard. This isn't a self-help video. This is an initiation, and once you see what's been hidden in your shadow, you will never look at yourself or your childhood the same way again. The invisible ghost. When the past doesn't pass. They say time heals all wounds. But that's not true for wounds you never saw, because the past doesn't live in the calendar. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the choices you keep making without knowing why. You can move across the world, change your name, cut ties. But if you never faced what shaped you, it follows you like a ghost you can't name. This ghost doesn't scream. It whispers through your relationships. It hides in your tone of voice, in your silences, in the way your shoulders tense when someone raises theirs. It's not just memory, it's a blueprint. And for many, it was drawn in childhood. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This ghost is the unconscious. It's the version of you that never got to speak, the feelings you weren't allowed to feel, the needs you learned to hide to survive. And it's still there. Beneath your adult self, beneath the roles you play, the partner, the professional, the friend, you think you're choosing freely. But really you're reacting from a script written in a house where no one talked about feelings, or maybe where feelings were talked about too much, but never truly felt. So you learn. Love means walking on eggshells. Anger means danger. Being seen is unsafe. Or worse, being invisible is the only way to belong. And all of it becomes normal. Not because it's healthy, but because it's familiar. So you carry this familiarity into adulthood. You recreate dynamics, attract similar people, reenact the same dramas. You're not cursed, you're not broken. You're haunted by a past that's never been fully witnessed. This is why growth feels like grief, because healing doesn't just bring light. It first reveals shadows. And before you can become who you truly are, you'll have to face who you had to become in order to be loved. That ghost isn't here to punish you. It's here to remind you the story isn't over, but the script can be rewritten. The wounded child, the first exile. Before we learned how to speak, we were already listening. To the tone of our mother's voice, to the tension in the room, to the smiles that felt empty and the silences that screamed. A child doesn't need language to know when love comes with conditions. In the beginning, every child shows up whole. They cry when they're hurt, laugh when they're free, ask boldly, express wildly. They come as they are. But in some homes, even the most well-meaning ones, that raw authenticity is met with discomfort, or judgment, or shame. And so, the child begins the first great betrayal. They split, not physically, psychologically. The parts of themselves that feel too much, too sensitive, too loud, too needy, are quietly exiled, sent to the basement of the psyche, buried beneath the growing desire to be approved of. This is the beginning of what Jung called the persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted, and at first it works. The child who hides their sadness becomes easy to raise. The one who ignores their anger is called so mature for their age. The one who stops asking for affection is praised for being independent. But beneath the surface, a fracture is forming. The inner child doesn't disappear. They wait, watching, aching, hoping. And as we grow, we forget them. But they never forget us. They show up later as anxiety in a crowded room, as panic when someone gets too close, as rage when we feel ignored, not because of what just happened, but because of everything that once happened and never found a voice. This is the tragedy of early exile. We lost our real self not because we were wrong, but because we were adapting to what felt safe. And now, as adults, we confuse that adaptation for identity. We say things like, "I'm just not emotional. I don't need anyone. I like being in control." But these aren't truths. They're protections. What if your greatest strength was once just a survival strategy? And what if the parts you buried are the exact parts you need now, to love, to connect, to feel alive? The child is still there, not broken, not weak, just waiting for someone to say, "You don't have to hide anymore." The weight of silence, what no one said but everyone felt. Some of the loudest traumas are the ones that were never spoken, not the slap, not the scream, but the quietness that fell after. The way the air thickened, the way everyone pretended nothing happened. In many families, silence is a survival tactic. It's how generations have learned to avoid collapse. Don't ask, don't feel, don't remember. And so, the house becomes quiet. But it's not peaceful. It's tense, fragile, watchful. The child picks up on everything. Not just what's said, but what isn't. They become experts in reading faces, feeling energy shifts, anticipating danger, and without realizing it, they become hyper-attuned, over-adapted, emotionally parentified. Because when no one names the truth, the child starts to believe the problem is them. Why is no one talking about what happened last night? Why does dad disappear when mom cries? Why do I feel like I can't breathe when I'm in this room? But no one explains, no one comforts. So the child fills in the blanks with shame. Jung believed that the psyche absorbs what the ego can't process. So when pain is too much, it doesn't go away. It goes unconscious, and that unconscious pain becomes the emotional wallpaper of the home. No one notices it anymore, but everyone is shaped by it. This is what Jung hinted at when he spoke of the family unconscious, a shared psychic field, charged with unspoken stories and unresolved emotions. Sometimes the silence is about grief, a death no one mourned, a sibling never mentioned, a betrayal never admitted. Other times the silence is about identity, a child who was different but never allowed to say how, a parent who suffered quietly while smiling in front of guests. It's not the event itself that does the most damage, it's the isolation that follows. The message becomes, "We don't talk about that here. Be strong. Keep going." So the child learns to split off the part that knows something's wrong and puts on the mask of fine, but inside there's a cost: anxiety, dissociation, numbness, a deep ache that has no name. Healing begins the moment one dares to speak what was never allowed, because the silence was never empty. It was full of fear, shame, and stories waiting to be told. And you were never crazy for feeling what no one else admitted. You were just the only one brave enough to feel the truth, the inherited shadow. when trauma becomes tradition? What if the pain you carry isn't just yours? What if the fears, the guilt, the patterns you keep reliving were passed down to you like a family heirloom, not in words, but in wounds? Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a realm where ancestral stories, unresolved emotions, and ancient instincts live on through you. In every family system there are secrets, things no one ever talks about, but everyone feels: a missing father, a betrayal, a generational addiction, a great-grandmother who was silenced, a grandfather who came home from war but never really returned. These events don't die with time. They linger, they echo, they become part of the emotional DNA passed through generations. Children are born into these energetic fields, and without knowing why, they start to carry what others refuse to feel. It might look like a daughter who lives with constant anxiety, mirroring the panic her mother suppressed, or a son who sabotages his success, repeating the self-worth wound of a father who never felt good enough. And it goes deeper. Sometimes a child becomes the emotional container for the family's shame. They're the problem, the sensitive one, the black sheep. Not because they're broken, but because they're the one who feels what others won't. Jung referred to this as the shadow inheritance, not just individual trauma, but ancestral. The unprocessed becomes unconscious, and the unconscious becomes fate, until someone breaks the cycle. But to break it, one must first see it, see the depression that was normalized, the love that came with manipulation, the belief that worth had to be earned, not given. Most families pass down more than just stories. They pass down coping mechanisms: silence, anger, avoidance, control. They pass down identities. You're the strong one. You're the smart one. You're just like your father. And each label becomes a chain. But here's the truth. You did not start this story, but it can end with you. You are not here to carry the pain forward. You're here to bring it into the light, to speak what was unspeakable, to feel what was suppressed, to choose a different path, not just for yourself, but for everyone who came before you, and everyone who will come after. The invisible chains, patterns you mistake for personality. I'm just that kind of person. It sounds innocent, but more often than not, it's a cage with nice wallpaper. We say things like, I don't trust easily, I don't like conflict, I'm the fixer, I'm always the strong one. But what if these traits aren't your personality at all? What if they're adaptations forged in the fires of childhood? Carl Jung warned that the persona, the mask we wear in society, is useful but dangerous when mistaken for the self. The persona helps us function. It keeps us safe, accepted, employed, included. But behind the curtain of that functional identity is often a child who learned that being real came with a price. So instead of feeling freely, you became low maintenance. Instead of asking for what you needed, you became a giver. Instead of showing pain, you smiled harder. And now you call it who you are. But it's not who you are, it's who you became to survive. There's a difference. Think about it. Is your calmness really peace? Or is it suppression? Is your independence truly strength? Or a wall built from too many disappointments? Are you really easygoing? Or just afraid of being a burden? You see, the unconscious is clever. It disguises pain as personality. It buries fear beneath competence. It turns defense into identity. And the longer you live like this, the harder it becomes to hear your real voice beneath the noise. This is why healing feels disorienting, because when you start taking off the mask, you realize you don't fully know what's underneath. But that's the work. To unlearn the version of yourself that was built to fit in and rediscover the one that was born to be free. Jung believed that wholeness isn't about perfection. It's about integration. The strong and the soft, the confident and the unsure, the light and the shadow. So ask yourself, who would you be if you weren't performing strength, if you weren't protecting everyone else's comfort, if you weren't afraid of being too much or not enough? Beneath the you, the world applauds, is a deeper self, waiting to be remembered. And that self, it's not perfect, but it's real. The repetition loop, why you keep attracting the same pain. Have you ever asked yourself, why does this keep happening to me? Different faces, different cities, different years, but somehow the same story, same emotional pain, same rejection, same betrayal, same feeling of being unseen, unloved, or never enough. This isn't coincidence. It's a loop. And the loop has a name: repetition compulsion. In Jungian psychology, it's not just trauma that shapes us, it's the unconscious need to reenact it. Why? Because the psyche is always seeking completion. It wants to relive what was unfinished, to finally get the love we were denied, to rewrite the moment we were broken. But here's the trap. You keep choosing characters who fit the old script. You find someone who reminds your nervous system of home, not because they're good for you, but because they're familiar. You confuse intensity with intimacy, chaos with passion, emotional unavailability with mystery, and suddenly, you're 7 years old again, trying to earn love, trying to be enough, trying to make it safe. The adult thinks it's about this relationship, but the unconscious knows. You're not arguing with your partner, you're arguing with your mother's silence, your father's rage, your childhood self that never got closure. Carl Jung said, "We are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to become." But before you can choose, you have to see the loop. You have to become aware of how often you confuse pain with purpose. Because until you do, your inner child is picking your partners, your shadow is writing your story, and your past is pretending to be your future. This isn't about blame, it's about liberation. You're not weak for repeating the cycle, you're wounded, and your psyche is trying desperately to heal the original injury. But healing doesn't happen through reenactment. It happens through awareness. It happens when you stop asking other people to save you and start giving yourself what you always needed: safety, permission, presence, love without performance. The loop ends not when someone finally gives you the love you craved, but when you no longer need them to. If this feels like your story, drop a comment. I'm starting to see it. Let's see how many of us are waking up. The fragmented identity. When you don't know who you are. There comes a moment in many lives when the question slips through the cracks. Who am I, really? And the silence that follows can feel unbearable. Because deep down, most people don't know. Not because they lack intelligence, ambition, or reflection, but because their identity was built in fragments. As children, they learned early that certain pieces of themselves were welcome and others were dangerous. The playful child might have been too much. The sensitive one was told to toughen up. The curious one was silenced with, "Don't ask questions." And so, like shards of a mirror, the self was scattered. One piece shines at school, another at home, another with friends, each piece a role, each role a mask. Carl Jung taught that the self, the true center of the psyche, is whole. But the path to it is long because most people mistake their fragments for their core. They think they are their achievements. They think they are their trauma. They think they are the role they've played for survival, the caretaker, the rebel, the achiever, the invisible one. But inside, beneath the surface, there is a fracture, a quiet ache, a sense that something essential is missing. And so the adult searches for identity in external places, in relationships, in careers, in lifestyles, labels, communities. They try on identities like costumes, waiting for one to finally feel like home. But the home they're searching for is not outside, it is inward. This is why many feel restless even when life looks successful. The house is full, but the soul feels empty, because the child they abandoned still waits at the center, holding the missing piece. Integration begins with the terrifying act of slowing down, listening, allowing the voices of the forgotten selves to emerge. The angry one, the tender one, the needy one, the joyful one. All the pieces demand a seat at the table, not to take over, but to be acknowledged. And when that happens, something extraordinary unfolds. The fragments don't disappear, they reunite. And the self, once fractured, begins to remember its wholeness. Identity is not a mask, it is a mosaic. And only when every piece is honored can a person truly say, "This is me." The mirror of anger. What irritates you reveals you. Why does anger feel so dangerous? Why does irritation flare so quickly, even in small moments? Because anger is never just about the present. It's a mirror, and it reflects the parts of the self we'd rather not see. Carl Jung described this as projection, the act of attributing to others what is secretly alive in us. When a person says, "I can't stand people who are selfish," it often hides their own unmet needs. When they say, "I hate people who are controlling," it may reveal the control they secretly crave. When they rage at dishonesty, it might echo the lies they tell themselves every day. Anger is the psyche's way of pointing, urgently, towards something exiled. This doesn't mean every frustration is projection. Sometimes anger is truth, a signal that boundaries are needed, but when the intensity is disproportionate, when the reaction burns hotter than the situation, that is when the unconscious is speaking. Imagine a child forbidden to express rage. They grow into an adult who prides themselves on being calm. But then, a co-worker's tone, a partner's words, a stranger's behavior, and suddenly the buried child erupts through them. It's not the co-worker, the partner, the stranger. It's the shadow breaking its silence. This is why anger, if faced consciously, becomes a gift. It shows the edges of what is disowned. It reveals the energy trapped in repression. It uncovers the vitality waiting to be reclaimed. The danger is not in anger itself. The danger is in denial. A person who admits their rage can work with it. They can channel it into courage, creativity, transformation. But a person who insists, "I'm never angry," becomes possessed by it in unconscious ways. Passive aggression, silent punishment, explosive outbursts. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." So the next time anger rises, the question is not, "How do I get rid of this?" The question is, "What is this anger asking me to see in myself?" Because the enemy outside is often the messenger within. If this made you reflect on your own anger, share this video with someone who also needs to hear it. Let's spread the mirror wider. Encounter with the shadow, the beginning of freedom. Every person carries a shadow, not just the dark memories, but the living parts of themselves that were locked away. The shadow is not evil, it is exiled. It is everything the child was told was too much, too weak, too dangerous, and yet it never disappears. It waits, just beyond awareness, influencing choices, coloring emotions, haunting relationships. Carl Jung taught that what we resist persists, and nowhere is this more true than in the shadow. For years, a person may run from it. They distract themselves with work. They numb themselves with addictions. They hide behind positivity, perfectionism, or control. But the shadow doesn't vanish. It leaks through nightmares, through anxiety, through sudden outbursts that shock even the one expressing them. At some point, the psyche demands confrontation, and this moment, though terrifying, is sacred. To meet the shadow is to meet the truth, the anger that was forbidden, the grief that was silenced, the desires that were shamed, the vulnerability that was mocked. When these hidden parts are finally faced, something remarkable happens. They stop controlling from the dark, and they begin to integrate into the light. This doesn't mean indulging every impulse. It means listening. It means saying to the rejected self, you belong too. The shadow, once faced, often reveals hidden gifts. The rage contains passion. The fear contains intuition. The shame conceals deep sensitivity, a capacity for empathy that was buried under judgment. Freedom begins here, not in denying the shadow, not in fighting it, but in seeing it, naming it, embracing it. Because what a person refuses to face in themselves, they will endlessly seek or fight in others. The true prison is not the shadow. It is the refusal to open the door and let it speak. And the key to that prison is courage. The courage to look inward. The courage to say, this is me too, and I no longer need to hide it. In that moment, the shadow transforms. It is no longer a monster. It becomes an ally, a guide, a bridge back to wholeness, becoming whole, the journey back to the self. Wholeness is not about perfection. It is not about becoming flawless, untouchable, or endlessly positive. It is about becoming real. For most of life, people confuse wholeness with fixing themselves. They think healing means erasing the past, deleting their flaws, silencing their shadows. But Carl Jung taught the opposite. Wholeness means integration. It means bringing together all the exiled parts, the child, the rebel, the caretaker, the dreamer, and letting them coexist in one soul. Imagine a circle. For years it has been broken into fragments, some pieces shining brightly, others hidden in the dark. Individuation, Jung's word for the journey of becoming whole, is the process of gathering those fragments, not polishing them into perfection, but honoring them for what they are. This journey is not easy. It requires humility to admit that the self one has been performing is only a fraction of the truth. It requires courage to embrace vulnerability, rage, grief, and longing, the parts once condemned as weaknesses. But on the other side of that courage lies freedom. Freedom to love without reenacting old wounds. Freedom to create without fear of failure. Freedom to exist without apology. The whole person does not need to deny their shadow. They walk with it, they listen to it, and in doing so, they become larger than their pain. Jung once wrote, "I'd rather be whole than good," because good is often just another mask, a performance to avoid judgment. But wholeness is beyond judgment. It is the union of opposites, light and dark, strength and weakness, past and future. This is the journey back to the self, the deeper center of the psyche, the source of wisdom that existed before the wounds and will exist long after the roles fall away. When a person begins to live from this center, they no longer repeat the same cycles blindly. They no longer confuse trauma with destiny. They no longer look outside for the missing piece, because the missing piece was never missing. It was waiting inside. Wholeness is not something one finds. It is something one remembers. And when it is remembered, life is no longer just survival. It becomes meaning, it becomes love, it becomes freedom. What is hidden controls you until you face it. The journey through the unconscious is never simple. It stirs memories, it awakens old fears, it reveals the ghosts we worked so hard to bury. But the truth remains. What is hidden controls you until you turn and face it. Childhood is not in the past. It lives on in the ways we love, the choices we make, the patterns we repeat. The wounds of the child echo in the silence of the adult, and the family's unspoken history breathes through each new generation until someone dares to break the cycle. Carl Jung showed us that healing does not come from denial, but from confrontation, from courage, from the willingness to meet the shadow face to face and discover that it was never an enemy, but a teacher. To face the wounded child is not to drown in pain, but to finally hold them, to finally say the words they never heard. You are safe now. You belong. You are enough. And when that happens, the loops begin to break, the silence begins to lift. The fragments of identity begin to find one another again. This is not the end of the story, it is the beginning. Because freedom is not forgetting where you came from. Freedom is seeing it clearly and choosing differently. The past will always be a part of you, but it does not have to be your prison. It can become your teacher, your strength, your doorway to depth. The shadow you fear most is holding the key to your wholeness. So the question is no longer, can I escape my past? The question is, am I willing to face it? Because until you do, you are condemned to repeat it. But once you do, you are free. And perhaps that freedom is not just for you. It is for everyone who came before you and everyone who will come after. Because when one person dares to face their shadow, the entire lineage begins to heal.